Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden, and we're also going to stick to my home county of Skåne here in the very south of the country. Now we're going to return to a brewery that has now featured on the channel a good number of times before. This is going to be my 14th review from them apparently, and I think it's safe to say that this brewery are best known for their different kinds of Imperial Stouts. And if this is a style of beer that you enjoy, this is one of the Swedish breweries that I highly recommend that you check out. But the beer that we're going to have a look at today is one of their latest releases through Systembolaget over here in Sweden, and it's actually one of the more highly rated Imperial Stouts that I've come across from them. So needless to say, I'm really curious to see how this one turns out. So hopefully it's another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always, I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So let's crack on and see how we go. For this review then, we are going to head to Arlöv, which is just a little bit to the northeast-ish of Malmö. And we're going to have a look at a beer from one of the Molecule Brewing brands. So this one comes to you from Nerd Brewing. It is one of the implements. They're describing this as an Imperial Chocolate Truffle Stout. It's the 2021 vintage, and it is the Salted Almond Edition as well. And it comes in at a little bit of a monstrous 12.1% ABV. So yeah, this should be very, very interesting. So, one of the things you have to be careful of with Nerd Brewing is that quite often they will use the same name for different beers, and you've just got different vintages and different editions and things like this. So that is why I rattled off all those different kind of details there right at the start. But this particular beer was released as part of the Lokal och Småskalig assortment through Systembolaget here in Sweden for January of 2021. And I actually had to be careful when I was thinking to get this one, because I thought I had one of the implements beers before, but it turns out that I haven't. But like I say, there's all the different editions and things like that, and all the different vintages and stuff like that, and basically I want to keep reviewing different beers all the time actually. So I wasn't sure whether to get this one, but yeah, managed to check and figure out that I hadn't had any of the implements beers. But this one, as I say, should be very nice. The 2020 edition of this is rated 4.21 on Untappd, which is pretty impressive, and this one is rated at like 4.03, but there weren't that many ratings for it yet, so that may well build further actually. But yeah, as I said earlier, if you're interested in Imperial Stouts, then Nerd Brewing are one of the ones in Sweden that you definitely need to check out. But let's crack on with this one then and see how we go. Always nice to review some more Nerd Brewing beers for you here on the channel. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll take you through a little bit of a brewery history before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Nerd Brewing in the past, and we will definitely add more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's being added to very regular at the moment, of course, because I am back over in Sweden. And as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to the brewery notes then, to tell you a little bit about Nerd Brewing once again. So as I've told you previously, Nerd Brewing were originally based in Rosengård in Malmö, but these days they're based in Arlöv, just a little bit to the northeast of the city. But the company was founded by Hannes Gruber and Karin Karlsson back in 2015, and they had their debut at the Malmö Öl and Whiskey Festival that year. But both of these guys were just big beer enthusiasts, and they really wanted to just kind of break into the industry. So Hannes had been a home brewer for a long time, and he got very good feedback on his beers, and it was this that really spurred him on and inspired him to turn professional. So he comes from a background in software development, and originally he was taking care of the brewing side of things, but that's the reason why a number of the Nerd Brewing beers use programming names for the name of the beer, I guess we could say. But in the early days as well, when Karen was involved, she was an entrepreneur and a trader within the IT industry, and she was looking after the business side of things, although she is no longer active in the company. But they started up with a very modest production in the early days, and very quickly they became the most highly rated brewery in Sweden according to Untappd, which was really impressive actually. I'm not sure if they still are the top rated brewery in Sweden, but they will certainly be up there amongst the top breweries anyway. And like I say, in terms of Imperial Stouts, very hard to beat these guys in Sweden, and generally speaking, they do some really good stuff, as I've said. But the beers were initially brewed in the Lilla Ulfabriken Chad beer factory in Rosengård, and there were some brewed at South Plains Brewing, which is right next door, but the company officially joined with Chad Beer and Lilla Ulfabriken to form a collective, but they continue to sell their beers under their own brands. But Nerd Brewing were mainly brewing, or have mainly brewed, Imperial Stouts, although over the years there has been 1 or 2 IPAs, and there's also been a barley wine or 2 as well. And I think there was a saison at one point as well, if I remember correctly. So yeah, there have been a good few different beers from these guys over the years, but nowadays they are focusing almost exclusively on Imperial Stouts. Or I think maybe it's better, it's more fair to say, generally speaking, big malty buggers of beers. But yeah, anyway. So, in the early days though, other than some beer festivals around Sweden, it was actually very, very difficult to get a hold of the Nerd Brewing beers. But from 2018, they started selling their beers through Systembolaget, and as of March 2021, they have been involved in a new collective called Molecule, which also includes Elm 11 and Chad Beer. So yeah, the Molecule Brewery is located in Arlöv, and it starts off with a 1500 litre brew kit, and it's mainly Anders Kvist of Elm 11 who is doing the brewing there, although Hannes does take part in brewing once a week. From what I understand. But yeah, Elm 11 produce these beautiful, big, fruity, juicy sour beers, and I really recommend that you check those out. It seems that Chad Beer now are focusing on lagers and IPAs and stuff like this, and of course, the Nerd Brewing brand will focus on the Imperial Stouts. And I guess I never know that. You never know. There might be some big Baltic porters and barley wines and stuff like that come out from Nerd Brewing later. But as of January 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced in the region of 110 different kinds of beer. And like I said to you, they do rebrew their beers quite often and do new vintages and things like that. Often they've also started barrel aging some of their stuff as well, but I am yet to try any of the barrel aged beers. I don't think any of them have actually been released through Systembolaget in Sweden. Actually, I've seen 1 or 2 of them over in Kiosk in Copenhagen, so maybe I'll have a look and pick up 1 or 2 of them the next time I go over there. But yeah, that is all I can really tell you about Nerd Brewing for the moment, and of course the Molecule Brewing Collective. If you would like to learn more though, you can check out the brewery website. Hannes actually publishes all of his recipes on the website. There are 1 or 2 that may well be missing just because he's very, very busy, but this is why they have the slogan open source beer, as you can see just under the thing there. So if you want to learn how to brew an Imperial Stout, a good Imperial Stout, then you can use some of Hannes's recipes, and that will teach you a great deal, I'm sure. But yeah, you can check out the brewery website and have a little look at the recipes. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can of course check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, just to tell you about this beer a little bit. So this one is aged on roasted cocoa nibs, roasted almonds, and it also contains some Himalayan salt as well, actually. So yeah, that is your details about the beer. But just to give you a little quick look at the artwork on this one before we open it up, as you can see, very straightforward, but it works. You can see it's got that lovely wax top on it that you always get from Nerd Brewing. And if you watch my interview that I did with Hannes, you'll see how how they actually do this. It's actually quite labour intensive, but he says that since he started releasing these beers this way, he can't really get out of it now. But yeah, the wax seal is pretty cool. But like we said, this is a 12.1% Imperial Stout, and it should be a little bit of a monster actually. So yeah, let's crack this one open then and see how we got on. The Implements Imperial Chocolate Truffle Stout Salted Almond Edition 2021 vintage from Nerd Brewing in Arlöv near Malmö. Now, before I started filming this one, I actually just sliced just under the rim of the cap there so that it opens a little bit easier. That's the only thing when it comes to filming beer videos. And these wax tops, some of them can be an absolute bastard to get into, but the Nerd Brewing ones aren't too bad. They're always reasonable in their thickness, but you do get some that are just absolutely insane. But just look at this guy. Look at that. This is going to be an absolute monster. Absolute monster of a beer. Want to try and get everything out. So yeah, this should be quite good. Only a little bit of sediment visible on this one as well actually, which is good. So anyway, as you can see, and as you would expect from a big Imperial Stout, this one has poured a lovely dark ebony rosewood colour. Before the head disappears though, you could see this one poured with about a quarter finger of quite a dark tan head actually. It did have a nice kind of thin foamy layer over the top, but there's just a few kind of spots, I guess we could say, sitting there now, but you do have a nice kind of foamy ring just around the edge of the glass there. But yeah, there's one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head there. But overall, it does look very nice, this one. There are one or two little bits of sediment kind of floating around in the bottom of the glass there. Just let you kind of see that. I'm not sure how well that will show up on the camera. I think you can see it now, yeah. So yeah, but it's all natural, so we don't really need to kind of care about that. But yeah, remember when it comes to the colour of your beer, as we say, this one's a big dark ebony rosewood colour, not surprising for an Imperial Stout, but the colour of your beer depends on, one, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating, and I think Hannes likes to use Special B in a lot of his beers, so that's one of the big reasons why you've got such a dark colour. There's lots of different other ones you can put in Imperial Stouts though, but the length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. Quite often these Imperial Stouts from the craft breweries have very long wort boils, and I know that sometimes Nerd Brewing like to leave the kind of wort kind of bubbling away overnight actually. But any barrel aging that you do and any adjuncts that you put in can also affect the colour of a beer. But to be honest, when it comes to Imperial Stouts, it's very difficult. I've only ever seen the colour of an Imperial Stout affected once by either of those two variables, and it was one from Puhasta in Estonia, and it had beets in it, and it had this purpley tinge to it. So yeah, most of the time when it comes to your Imperial Stouts, it's the actual malts themselves that determine the colour of the beer. But yeah, in terms of what you'd expect from the style, this is nothing surprising, so I think we should have a little look at the aroma of this one then, and just see how we get on. So let's go for it. Oh yeah, that's a beautiful beer once again. As I've said before, probably my favourite thing about the Nerd Brewing beers is that they are kind of like, they always have a little bit of Russian Imperial Stout character to them. They always, regardless, you might take this one, an Imperial Chocolate Truffle Stout, and you might think, oh, this is going to be like an Imperial Milk Stout or something like that. And I've had Imperial Milk Stouts from Nerd Brewing before, but the thing with them is, they always just have a little bit of that roasty toasty character that you would expect of the Russian Imperial Stout sub-style. You always get that with Nerd Brewing, and that's one of the reasons why I really, really like their beers. They always just yeah, this is an Imperial Stout. And it's maybe become a little bit more prominent a point for me because you've had all these pastry stouts in recent times, and as a style, I'm not the greatest fan of that, I have to say. I prefer a good old school Russian Imperial Stout over anything else. But yeah, the way that this beer comes across in its aroma is very nice. So let's just break it down for you a wee bit more. So the backbone of this beer, it's got a nice roasty toasty well fired kind of bread crust to it. That's the backbone of it. There's certainly a nice little bit of kind of brown bready character in there. You can really pick that up. That's going to be amplified by the kind of wheaty side of things as well, for sure, because this beer does have wheat and oats in it. So yeah, roasty toasty well fired bread crust, a little bit of a smooth brown bready sort of thing in this one, but you've also got a whole host of other things just kind of sitting on top of it. But yeah, there's one or two little woody notes in there. There's a little bit of nuttiness too. You always get these kind of notes from the Nerd Brewing beers. But yeah, roasty toasty bread crust is the backbone. Wee bit of a there's a wee bit of a nutty character to it. A little bit of a little bit of a woody element in there as well, and then some nice kind of smooth brown bready character on top of that, which I do suspect is coming from the wheat. So yeah, the way that this goes together, I think, is very, very nice. So yeah, aroma wise, I'm quite impressed with this beer and the backbone of it. Now I will say it doesn't strike me as one of the sweeter ones that I've come across from Nerd Brewing actually, but the aroma is still really nice. But as I say, Nerd Brewing don't tend to be on the sweet side of the spectrum with Imperial Stouts, I don't think. But some of you might disagree with that, of course. And remember, beer is all kind of subjective. Different people interpret different things. That's why we love it. But yeah, on top of that kind of bready layer, there's certainly a good little bit of chocolate out of this one. I mean, you get quite a high percentage cocoa chocolate in this, the 80-90%. I do find that there's quite a wee bit of... there's quite a bit of dryness to that as well. When it's aged on roasted cocoa nibs, that would make sense. Cocoa nibs I always find give you a wee bit of dryness as well. And I think the more that you smell this one, the more that you get a bit of brown sugar out of it. You can smell a little bit of that, for me, highly caramelized treacle molasses kind of thing. And remember, the longer your wort boil, the more the brown sugars develop this kind of leathery sort of aroma and flavour. But oddly enough, this one has a little bit of that, but you can still smell that it's quite sweet. And I do wonder if that's the salt that's doing that. If it comes across a little bit like a salted caramel note, this one, in a lot of ways. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. I do actually get quite a wee bit of brown sugar out of this one. And then of course, the more that you smell of it as well, within that sweetness, within that brown sugary sweetness, I think that's where the almonds are coming out of this one. So yeah, aroma-wise on the malty side of things, this one is really quite interesting actually. I think it's interesting because the malty side of the beer really gets a little bit sharper and sharper the more that you smell of it actually. And there's maybe one or two little kind of hints of coffee in this one as well actually. So yeah, really interesting beer on the malty side of things. Let's just have a little quick look at the hops and the fruity side of the beer before we actually taste it. So hoppy side of things again is what you expect, what you would expect. So there's definitely a wee bit of earthiness in there. I think this beer is still fairly fresh, so I'm still getting a little bit of grassiness out of it as well, and a little bit, pardon me, of floral character. But remember, with a big Imperial Stout like this, you can age it for quite a wee while, and those hoppy characters will drop out a little bit, so that these flavours will very much depend on when you drink this beer, because you could in theory age this thing for about 10 years, probably even more than that of course. But yeah, aroma wise on the hoppy side of things, definitely some earthiness, a wee bit of floral character and a bit of grassiness, but there are some really nice kind of fruity notes to this one. So for me, this beer is actually quite sharp on its fruits. It's got a good little bit of a raisiny character to it, definitely some kind of figgy notes and plums in there as well, but also a wee bit of a sharper blackberry. I don't get so much in the way of a softer blackcurrant. I really find this one is quite sharp and raisiny and quite sharp and blackberry like as well. So yeah, definitely a wee bit of an oily fig underneath though, and some plummy notes too. But yeah, this should be a really interesting one actually to try. But as I always say, take a little bit of time to just mull over the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it. But I think it is about time that we have a taste of this one and see how we go. So just to give it its full name, so this one is the Implements 2021 Vintage Imperial Chocolate Truffle Stout Salted Almond Edition. And if you wondered what that is the door, the outside door of my room kind of blowing in the wind. I don't know why it does that, but if you hear that in the videos, that's what it is. But yeah, let's crack in with this one then. The 2021 Implements Salted Caramel Edition, 12.1% ABV from Nerd Brewing in Arlöv near Malmö. Slange, skål, cheers. Ooh. Damn. You know, when you've had a number of beers of the same style from a brewery, you sometimes just think, you know, you can't, you know, they're not going to surprise me. You expect a good beer, but that, I think, that's one of the most striking beers I think I've had from Nerd Brewing, and it's also got one of the biggest transitions that I can think about as well. I'm starting to get the aftertaste now. So this beer, the impact that this thing has is quite different from what I remember having had from Nerd Brewing before. And this is one of the good things I like about this, is that you get one of these beers every month. You're not getting a load of stuff from the same brewery. It kind of allows you to build up an opinion of a brewery over time. But this one, when you take it in, it's really oily and kind of silky and things, and then it just gradually gets more roasty and toasty. And this is what I was saying to you. Nerd Brewing beers always have this Russian Imperial Stout side to them. They've always got that backbone, regardless of what the name is and how sweet you think it's going to be from the title. These beers always have that roasty, toasty backbone. I would be curious to see if that holds up in some of the barrel-aged ones that they do. I've not managed to try those yet, as I said, but yeah, these beers always have that roasty, toasty backbone to them, and this one's no exception. So this one starts off like really sweet and silky, and actually a little bit sharper and things. It's got a very, compared to what I remember from some of the other Nerd Brewing ones, it starts off a lot sweeter than those, but the transition into the roasty, toasty bitterness is quite stark, I would say that. So this beer's got a hell of a transition in the flavour. So just be aware of that. But in terms of the standards, pardon me, that we expect of Nerd Brewing, it certainly doesn't let us down. This could well be one of my favourite beers that I've had from them. I really liked the barley wine that they did, but I think that stuck out to me a bit more just because it was different. But yeah, in terms of the Imperial Stouts, I think this is one of the best ones we've had. So yeah, thumbs up to Nerd Brewing for this once again. But not surprised, definitely not surprised. So, on the... Where do we start with this? Let's just go through it as we always do. So what I'll say about this beer is the backbone, middle third, back third of the palate, this one really has a very dry, roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust character to it, and I really like how that goes together in this one. So yeah, the way that this works is very, very nice. And as I say in the beginning, it's very, very sweet, but then it just gets roastier and toastier the further that you go on. There's one of my subscribers, Brian Skirving, he likes to do the roasty toastyometer. So there'll be a lot of that in this one, Brian. You'll have fun counting them. But yeah, that's awesome. So as I say, roasty toasty, well-fired backbone to this one, like a really well-fired bread crust. Sitting on top of that, you get a little bit of brown bread, although that layer doesn't feel overly dense, if that makes sense, but you can feel a little bit of the wheat sitting on top of that, just thickening out the bready character actually, which is quite nice. And on top of that, you can feel the oaty notes just kind of smoothing out the whole beer. So yeah, roasty toasty well-fired bread crust, bit of brown bread, the kind of slightly thickening wheaty layer, and then the smooth oats sitting on top of that. And the other parts of the flavour, that are listed on the name, of course, do sit on top of that as well. So let's kind of examine those a wee bit. So another thing I should point out as well is that in that kind of base layer, as you come further forward toward the border with the front third of your palate, that's when you start to get some of the sort of slightly sweet woody undertones. You get a little bit of there's maybe a teeny tiny little hint of vanilla in there, just very, very minimal. There's no vanilla in this beer, of course, I will be very clear on that. But yeah, you get a little bit of woodiness, wee tiny little bit of vanilla, and you also get a little bit of a kind of just regular nutty character in there as well. And I think the further you go into the aftertaste with it, that smoother side of the beer, it does become gradually more prominent as your palate adjusts to the beer. But yeah, I don't think that is overly prominent actually in the beginning. It really is more about the roasty toasty side of things. But again, you always get this thing with IBUs in beers. When it comes to sourness or IBU, there's an impact factor in there, and then your beer, as your palate adjusts to it, it becomes less kind of noticeable, if you like. So yeah. Quite windy outside apparently. So yeah. But yeah, anyway. On top of the oaty layer then, let's go back to that. Toward the back of that middle third of your palate, you can certainly feel some of that cocoa nib kind of dryness in there, and the roasted cocoa nibs as well. So the chocolatey side of this beer is really quite bitter actually. You're talking, an 80-90% cocoa chocolate anyway, but then you've got that roasty toasty character mixed in with it. But as you come further forward on that kind of chocolatey layer, it smoothens out a little bit, and that's when you start to get the smoother almond side of the beer in there, and that's interesting too. But within that layer, it's almost like you've got a little circle just kind of sitting on top of that, and that's where you get the kind of brown sugary flavours that I was talking about earlier. So yeah, in the middle of the palate, the brown sugars are actually not as kind of leathery and caramelized as I thought they might be. They're actually quite sweet in a lot of ways, but I think this beer actually is turning out very, very similarly to what I thought it was going to be from the aroma. This is one of these beers where the aroma translates into the flavour very, very well. Sometimes they don't. We've had beers like this before. But yeah, this one really, the flavour really translates, the aroma really translates into the flavour really well, I should say. So yeah, in the middle of your palate, you've got a little circle there, and it's a kind of sweet brown sugary sort of thing, but at the same time, it's quite salty. It's like a sort of salted caramelly note that you get out of this, and that really does linger into the aftertaste with a bit of the nutty character as well. So yeah, this is interesting. This one, it might well be one of the more bitter Imperial Stouts I've had from Nerd Brewing, but it's certainly a very, very nice beer. So yeah, but definitely this is one of the ones that I can remember having had from Nerd Brewing that has the biggest transition from the initial sweetness to the kind of more bitter aftertaste. So yeah, this one is quite interesting. That's safe to say. But yeah, I think that's everything we really need to say, pardon me, about the middle third of the palate in this one, and that's the most complex part, of course. But let's look at the border region between middle third and back third of your palate. So again, you get a little bit of a kind of bready build up in there. Get a wee bit of that, but the base of that back third of your palate has a little bit of a more kind of roasty, toasty element to it. You certainly get more of that kind of black malty special B, well-fired bread crust sort of thing there. On top of that, you get a slightly thicker brown bready layer, and then on top of that, I think it's the yeasty part of the beer. So for me, the back third of the palate in this beer isn't quite as tall as some of the other, lighter beers, the IPAs and stuff like this that we've had before. But yeah, it still works nonetheless. So on top of that kind of more bready layer, you do get a little bit of yeastiness in there. So let's just kind of examine that. So yeah, on top of that, you do get a little bit of that more dense, doughy, yeasty, a little bit of that doughy, dense, yeasty kind of thing sitting on top, and it's quite, it's like a dense brown bread. There's a wee bit of a slightly woody note to it as well, and then again, quite a bit of a bread crusty sort of thing. So yeah, roasty, well-fired, kind of bread crust there, thicker brown bread, and then the yeasty character sitting on top of that. As I say, at the back, on the back third of your palate, the flavour's a little bit taller, and then as you come further forward, the flavours just condense down a little bit, and they're a wee bit more squashed together as you go into that middle third of the palate there. So yeah, that's something we have come across before quite a lot in some of these beers. But yeah, anyway, on the hoppy side of things, I think we've covered everything we need to about the malty and yeasty side of the beer. On the hoppy side of things, it is pretty much what you'd expect. In the back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthiness there. As you move further forward, it's definitely a little touch more herbal. Then as you push towards the kind of front corners of the palate, it's a little bit more kind of floral and aromatic. But round the front curve of the tongue, it's a little bit lighter and grassy for sure. And I think, yeah, the floral notes and the grassy notes that are there, they will fade away over time if you actually decide to age this beer. So keep that in mind. But let's focus on the front third of the palate and the fruity side of things then. So border region between front third and middle third of the palate, again, you get a little bit of that bready build up there, and it does have a wee bit of toastiness to it. It's like a toasty, well-fired bread crust again. Then the base of that front third of your palate is a little bit more of a roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust as well. So I like that. I do like that. So on top of that base layer, you do get that nice oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. And this one is kind of pretty much what you would expect. And I'd say it's a wee bit different from what we picked up in the Aroma. So yeah, at the back of that front third of your palate, on top you get some big sharp raisiny notes. There's a wee bit of a plummy character underneath. Then you've got that big oily figgy character sitting there on the back half of the front third of your palate. But then as you move further forward, the figgy character does push forward a wee bit, and it pushes right into the front half of the front third of your palate. And then on top of that, you get a wee bit more of that oily, sharp blackberry type character out of this one. The fruity side of this beer really is quite sharp, and as I've repeated a few times, I really find that this is one of those beers where the aroma really translates into the flavour very, very well. This one is like almost exactly as I would have expected, and maybe there's just a bit of, experience in there knowing what the Nerd Brewing beers are like. This is something you always have to bear in mind with my reviews, but this one really is the aroma out of this has translated very, very well into the into the flavour. It's really very, very similar in a lot of ways, but the fruity side of this one is definitely quite sharp and quite oily in a lot of ways. But like I said earlier, the further you go into the aftertaste with this one, the things that linger, the cocoa nib toastiness in there, the big kind of black malty sort of things. Yeah, this beer gets really, as I say, it starts off very, very sweet, but it gets a lot more roasty and toasty the more that you drink of it. Let's round off the review with a look at the mouthfeel then. So, mouthfeel wise, this beer definitely full-bodied, there's no doubt in my mind about that. The carbonation is very, very smooth. It's got a lovely silky mouthfeel to it actually. You maybe could say it's oily, but I find it quite silky in a lot of ways. In terms of IBUs, this has got to be, 90 to 100. It's got to be saturation point with this. But the bitterness in this beer, there is some of it coming from the hop, but there is quite a bit of it coming from the roasty, toasty backbone. And some of it, I think, from the cocoa nibs that have been put in here as well. So, yeah, this is definitely 90, 100 IBUs. This is a very, very bitter beer, in my opinion. It's not going to blow the head off you, especially if you've had some of these beers before, but this is quite a bitter beer, that. But that's not to say that the malt base doesn't have some smooth characteristics to it, and also some sweeter side as well. You get the saltiness in there too, and I think the saltiness is actually something that brings out the sweeter caramelly side of the malt base too. But the fruity side of the beer, as I've mentioned as well, is quite oily, and it's quite a sharp red fruity character that you get out of it. So yeah, mouthfeel, this one is quite nice. As I say, it starts off very, very, very silky and kind of sweet, this beer, but then it really gets roasty and toasty the further into you go. But that roasty toastiness, the Russian Imperial Stout kind of character, that's the signature of Nerd Brewing for me. But yeah, I think this is another awesome, awesome beer. So yeah, big thumbs up to Nerd Brewing once again, and always nice to try the new beers from these guys. But let's leave it at that. This one was the 2021 edition of the Implements Imperial Chocolate Truffle Stout Salted Almond Edition. Just another awesome beer from Nerd Brewing, and we can't ask for much more. So as always, let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Nerd Brewing. We will return to these guys in the future, of course, but in the meantime, check out my social media, check out their social media. You can look at Nerd Brewing's website as well to have a look at some of their recipes if you want to learn to brew a very good Imperial Stout. But yeah, most importantly, check out some of the Nerd Brewing beers because they are pretty damn good. Thank you again for watching, and I'll catch you guys very soon. Slàinte, skål, cheers.